towns in Florida. 3 places that the maps still show, but nobody goes back to. One was built by people who talked to the dead, and something at that hotel never checked out. One was burned to the ground by a mob in 1923. The people scattered. The buildings vanished. But stand in those trees today, and you will hear something that has no business being there. And the last one, Fort George Island. Every civilization that ever lived on that ground ended badly. The Timucua, the Spanish, the British, the enslaved, all of them gone, all of them leaving something behind. Rangers who work that island won't talk about certain parts of the trail, won't say why their radios stop working in the same spots every single time, won't say what one of them heard. In a section of forest where no path runs and no visitor is ever allowed, children's voices in empty trees. These are 3 real places, and I promise you the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Most towns in Florida were built on citrus, lumber, or tourism. Casadaga was built on something else entirely. Tucked quietly in the heart of central Florida, just a short drive north of Orlando, Casadaga doesn't announce itself the way most towns do. There are no billboards, no chain restaurants, no welcome signs designed to pull you off the highway. You have to want to find it, and once you do, once you turn down those narrow roads and feel the air change around you, you start to wonder if the town knew you were coming before you did. Casadaga is often called the psychic capital of the world. That title has followed it for over 100 years, and the town has never once tried to shake it. It was founded in 1894, the height of the American spiritualist movement, as a dedicated retreat for mediums, healers, and those who believed, with absolute conviction, that death is not the end of conversation. The men and women who built this town weren't eccentrics on the fringe. They were grieving people, in an era devastated by war and epidemic, who needed to believe their loved ones could still be reached. Casadaga gave them a place to try. What's unsettling is that it never stopped. Walk through Casadaga today and the streets are quiet in a way that doesn't quite feel like ordinary quiet. Cottages sit close together beneath old Florida oaks. Wind chimes move without much wind. The Casadaga Hotel, built in the 1920s, still operating, stands at the center of town like something that has been patiently watching everything that happens around it. Guests over the decades have reported knocks on doors that open to empty hallways. Voices in rooms nobody entered. A presence on the second-floor landing that multiple unconnected visitors have described, unprompted in almost identical terms. Standing still, not threatening, simply waiting. The hotel staff don't argue with these accounts. They've heard them too many times. Nearby, the spiritualist camp continues to hold services and offer readings, the same as it did in 1894. In a country where almost nothing survives unchanged for 130 years, that continuity is itself a kind of evidence. Of what exactly is harder to say. But it's the cemetery that stays with you longest. Casadaga's burial ground sits beneath a canopy of old trees at the edge of town. The graves date back to the earliest residents, the first mediums, the first believers, the founders of this unusual place. Locals speak of the cemetery, not with fear, but with a kind of careful reverence, as if the people buried there are not entirely finished. One longtime resident, when asked what makes Casadaga different from any other old Florida town, said simply, "Most places remember their dead. This one keeps in touch." Casadaga's horror is not loud. It has no single disaster, no massacre, no dramatic collapse. Its horror is quieter and, in some ways, more unsettling than any of those things. It is a town that has spent 130 years insisting that what most of us call an ending is really just a different kind of presence. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to disagree. Some towns don't fade, some towns are destroyed. Rosewood is a name that still lands differently than other names on any list of Florida's lost places. Spoken more carefully, heard more heavily, not because of what nature did to it, but because of what people did. In the forests of Levy County, in the early years of the 20th century, Rosewood was a small, largely self-sufficient black community. Families had built something real there: homes, churches, a school, a way of life rooted in the land they owned and worked. By the standards of the time and the region, it was a community that had, against considerable odds, made itself permanent. In January of 1923, that permanence was destroyed in less than a week. A false accusation in a neighboring white community was enough to ignite what followed. Armed mobs descended on Rosewood across several days. Houses were burned. The church was burned. Families fled into the surrounding swamps and woods, hiding in freezing January conditions, some for days. At least 6 residents were killed. Historians believe the true number was higher. By the time the violence ended, Rosewood had been leveled. The survivors scattered across Florida, carrying what they had witnessed in a silence that would last, for many of them, the rest of their lives. The state of Florida did not formally acknowledge what happened until 1994, 71 years later, when it became the first state in the country to provide reparations to survivors of a racially motivated massacre. Today, the forest has grown back over Rosewood so completely that you can stand where the town was and see nothing but trees, no ruins, no foundations visible from the road, almost no physical evidence that anything was ever there at all. And that is precisely what makes it so profoundly unsettling. People who visit the area, particularly those who know the history before they arrive, describe the silence differently than they describe the silence of other abandoned places. Not peaceful, not empty, heavy. The kind of quiet that feels like it is holding something in rather than simply existing. Some describe the sense of movement in their peripheral vision among the trees. Others say the air feels charged in a way they cannot rationalize. A few have reported hearing, briefly and without explanation, the distant sound of a structure burning, a low, deep, rhythmic crackling that stops the moment they focus on it. Whether or not you believe in residual haunting, in the idea that places absorb and hold the energy of what happened within them, Rosewood tests that skepticism. The horror here is not supernatural in origin. It is entirely human. But what it left behind in that forest, that weight, that stillness, that refusal of the land to simply move on, feels like something that exists beyond explanation. Rosewood was not lost to time or economics or disaster. It was taken, and the land has never forgotten what was taken from it. There are places in this world where the ground remembers everything. Fort George Island is one of them. At the northeastern edge of Florida, where the St. Johns River pushes out toward the Atlantic, Fort George Island exists in a kind of permanent in-between. Not quite wilderness, not quite town, not quite past, not quite present. A place where standing on a path through the trees you feel, not metaphorically, but physically, the pressure of centuries stacked beneath your feet. The Timucua people lived here for thousands of years. They built villages along the rivers and marshes, constructed the shell mounds that still rise from the earth today, buried their dead in ground that was sacred long before European ships arrived. Their presence on this island was not brief or incidental. It was ancient and deeply rooted. Then came the Spanish, then the British, then the plantation era, when Fort George Island became the site of one of antebellum Florida's most productive sea island cotton plantations, worked by enslaved people on land that had already witnessed centuries of displacement and loss. The plantation house still stands. Its bones remain solid while everything around it returns to forest. Every era on Fort George Island ended badly. The Timucua were devastated by European disease, then by conflict, then by a forced march. The surviving few relocated by Spanish colonial authority in the early 1700s. The colonial settlements fell to conflict and abandonment. The plantation era collapsed with the Civil War, and the families who had been enslaved there scattered into a freedom that offered very little immediate stability. The small residential communities that came afterward dwindled quietly across the 20th century until almost nothing remained. What remains now is the land itself, and the land holds everything. Paths wind through forest past shell mounds that represent thousands of years of human habitation. Plantation ruins sit in clearings. The old cemetery contains graves that span multiple eras, indigenous burial sites, colonial period graves, headstones from the plantation years, layers of death, layers of lives interrupted. People who visit Fort George Island, particularly those who walk deeper into the wooded areas, away from the main historical markers, describe a specific and consistent experience, the feeling of being watched from the tree line. Not one presence, but many. Not threatening, but aware. As if the island itself has developed a kind of consciousness from absorbing so many endings. and it watches every new visitor with the patient attention of something that has seen arrivals and departures for a very long time. Rangers who work the island speak carefully about certain areas where their radios behave strangely, where animals won't go, where the quality of sound changes as if the air has a different density. One ranger, in an account shared with a local history group, described hearing what she was certain were children's voices in a section of forest where no paths run and no visitors were present. Clear enough to be real, gone too quickly to follow. Fort George Island is the most disturbing entry on this list, not because of a single event, not because of one disaster or one act of violence or one night when something inexplicable happened.